Today I fucked up by taking a gummy. Strap in everyone, you're gonna be here a while. I, 20M, bought a new pack of gummies yesterday from the person who pierced my nose, and I wanted to test them out. I took the normal amount I usually do, but I figured it wouldn't be an issue since I didn't have anything to do today. I've been staying with my boyfriend, 20M, in his room at a college housing co-op since my school hasn't started yet. While he knew I'd bought the new pack, I didn't tell him I planned on taking anything until I'd already ingested it. On his end, he'd been having some abdominal pain all day but thought if he just rested a bit he'd feel better. An hour or so later, when his pain had not subsided, my boyfriend took half a gummy since he didn't have any classes for the rest of the day. Neither of us took more than we usually do, but the gummies were much better quality than either of us are used to. Not even half an hour later my boyfriend's pain had become unbearable, and he was fairly certain he had a UTI. Spoiler alert, he did. At this point, I was starting to feel the full range of the gummies' effects, so I urged him to text his mom to ask what he should do. She instructed us to call the number on my boyfriend's insurance card and to set up a teledoc appointment, but to no avail. So, as my boyfriend sat on the toilet in tears from the excruciating pain, his mother told me I needed to drive him to the nearest urgent care. There are, of course, two problems here. I, in my significantly altered state, absolutely could not drive, and was unwilling to even attempt to. The second issue is that my boyfriend's mother is super against any kind of substance use, especially anything relating to gummies, so I knew asking her for help was out of the question, and that she'd get suspicious if I told her I couldn't drive. I offered to call an Uber, but my boyfriend decided that, since the gummies' effects hadn't hit him yet, he would just bite the bullet and drive us both to urgent care. By some miracle, we arrived at the address my boyfriend's mom had sent to us earlier. Only, the location was closed and had a different address listed for the new urgent care location. My boyfriend slipped into a half-panicked delirium from pain and frustration because he couldn't find the new address on Google Maps, so we spent a solid 10 minutes just figuring out how to get to the other urgent care. Eventually, I came up with the brilliant idea of manually entering the address into my map, and we were once again on our way. We arrived at the urgent care just as my boyfriend's gummy began to kick in, but he refused to tell me, even though I had picked up on it. We proceeded to talk to the man at the front desk to check in and get any required paperwork. When my boyfriend, who had been in unbearable pain for the past hour, asked why the old location was closed, the man at the front desk got short with us and explained something about bureaucratic issues that I honestly cannot be bothered to remember. Now, offended, had been added to the laundry list of negative emotions my boyfriend was forced to deal with while I was so far up in the stratosphere I could not even tell my left from my right in the car while giving him directions to the clinic. Since he was so disoriented from the pain, I offered to fill out my boyfriend's paperwork. As I did so, my boyfriend's mental state had fully developed from floating to flying, despite his best efforts to keep it a secret from me, and we both became giggly messes in the waiting room of the urgent care. As I filled out medical and insurance information to the best of my ability, my boyfriend began drafting a post in this very subreddit. Unfortunately, the urgent care's Wi-Fi was particularly shitty, so the post was nerfed by Reddit Mobile. After all the information had been successfully completed and returned to the front desk, along with a $150 copay, my boyfriend took my phone and began rapidly spamming one of my Instagram group chats with vague messages about being inebriated in urgent care, getting into a scuffle, his actual verbiage, with the guy at the front desk, followed by a series of those stupid metaverse emojis. He clicked send on every message with a devilish grin on his face and his reddened eyes wide with manic glee. He was absolutely certain my friends would find these messages as funny as he did. He was, of course, incorrect. My friends were, understandably, worried sick after receiving a slew of random messages from my boyfriend about being out of his mind in urgent care with absolutely no information about my whereabouts, not to mention the apparent scuffle my boyfriend had gotten into with the man at the front desk. They legitimately believed he had gotten into a physical altercation with the guy at the front desk. I was eventually able to clear things up with my friends, but I still felt awful knowing I'd freaked them out so much. Finally, my boyfriend got called into the back by a nurse, and I had to wait for what felt like an eternity, 15 minutes, while my boyfriend got a diagnosis. I stared at my Crocs, which, by the way, are covered in a hemp leaf pattern, and twiddled my thumbs, terrified I'd be arrested for public intoxication or for being underage. At one point, my boyfriend texted me to say his heart rate was low. I thought my life was over until I remembered HIPAA exists. Once my boyfriend had in fact been diagnosed with a UTI, we sent the medication to a pharmacy. Except, once we got into the car we realized the pharmacy closed at 7 p.m. It was 6:59 p.m. and my boyfriend had to rush inside to get the pharmacy changed to a location that wouldn't close until 9 p.m. Our brief interlude of relief was interrupted as soon as we both sat back down in the car. There were several issues we had not previously considered. The first was that neither of us should or even could drive. This was particularly difficult for my boyfriend to think about, as one of his close friends' parents had recently passed away in a car accident and it had been weighing heavily on him, so even thinking about driving under the influence was enough to send him spiraling even after I assured him that either of us driving was completely out of the question. My brain could not work fast enough to properly comfort him, so I sat in the passenger's seat and stared blankly at him as he curled up into a fetal position in the driver's seat and began to sob uncontrollably. I was eventually able to talk him into calling one of his friends from the co-op to take us back, and we were thankfully able to get back there safe and sound. Unfortunately, that was only the beginning. As we walked back to my boyfriend's room we realized another problem. We still needed to pick up his medication. The only silver lining about his altered state was that it was able to somewhat mitigate his pain, but he definitely didn't want to risk infection by waiting until the next day to pick up the medication. Of course, we didn't have a car, and we'd already called our lifeline to get back to home base, so now we were on our own. Not to mention the fact that, as stated before, we had called the medication to a different pharmacy than normal in order to avoid the closing time, so the walking distance was significantly farther than we'd anticipated. I offered to walk there by myself, but he was, honestly pretty justifiably, concerned about me venturing out into a large urban city in an altered state by myself at night, so we both had to walk over half a mile down to the pharmacy. If that wasn't bad enough, several of the roads were closed due to construction, which made our trip even longer and more complex. As we were trudging to the pharmacy, both of us still feeling like laminated paper, my boyfriend asked if we could pick up Domino's on the way back since there's one super close to the co-op. He mentioned Domino's several times during the walk. Wanting to make up for my less than solid performance as a partner for the past few hours, I agreed. Buying about $50 worth of Domino's for 2 people, I firmly believed I needed that much to satiate my munchies. When I set the order to pick up, the app indicated that the location was not currently doing pickup orders. I, in my unblemished record of wisdom, decided to change the pickup location to the second closest Domino's to the co-op without consulting my boyfriend about it. After all, it's on the same street as the pharmacy, so there couldn't possibly be any issues, right? The Domino's was a 25-minute walk from the pharmacy in the opposite direction from the co-op. The order had not yet been paid for and we couldn't figure out how to change it from pickup to delivery. For some reason neither of us thought to just call. After walking to the pharmacy and waiting half an hour for the medication to be refilled, my boyfriend started to sober up. He realized that he would soon be in a mental state befitting a low-rate chauffeur, and we decided to find a bus route that would bring us as close to his car as possible. After waiting at the bus station for another 15 minutes, my boyfriend's pain slowly began creeping back up on him. Determined to get the car and the Domino's, he persevered and sat on the bus waiting for our next stop as I tried, and failed, to pay the bus toll. We were emotionally and physically exhausted, excited to get home with our pizza and, in my boyfriend's case, take medication for a UTI. The bus sped by the urgent care with my boyfriend's car in the parking lot, approaching our bus stop, then drove right past it. I was not presently capable of contorting my face into an expression that could do this situation justice. We watched, helpless, as the bus drove farther and farther away from our stop. The buildings began to look unfamiliar in the dark or, more accurately, we were in an unfamiliar part of town in the dark, and we were well beyond the range to walk back to my boyfriend's car. Eventually, once the bus came to a screeching halt at the next stop, my boyfriend and I darted out the door. At this point, my boyfriend was beyond distraught, and I realized I would have to be the one to figure this out despite my mental state. I led the both of us to a gas station across the street and called for an Uber to bring us back to the car, something I should have done back at the pharmacy. My boyfriend needed to sit down, but there was no public seating around. The first Uber was a bust. He kept driving farther away instead of closer. I called another in due time, but that couldn't stop my boyfriend from kneeling on the sidewalk, bawling his eyes out as we both loitered in front of a gas station. Eventually, the Uber came and picked us up, and we were able to pick up our Domino's, an hour late, and drive home without incident. Too long did not read. I took a gummy while my boyfriend was having a medical emergency and triggered a series of unfortunate events rivaled only by Lemony Snicket's imagination. The mention of having to walk half a mile, as if it was an issue, is really irking the British in me. That's such a light walk even if you are in a drugged-up state. Are these just THC gummies? He is really against DUI but drove twice under the influence. Man shrugging. This was brutal lol. The metaverse emojis were a new one. Skill issue.